Hello, writers and readers, and welcome to episode number 4 of the Let's Write a Novel podcast. I'm your host, Dane Andrews, and before we get started, I wanted to announce that I am officially on TikTok. You can find the link as well as the link to my Blue Sky account in the description below, or by looking up the Let's Write a Novel podcast in the app. Today, we're going to discuss the 3-act structure of storytelling and zone in on Act 1. You can take most any fiction novel and break it down into 3 acts. The first act involves the exposition, inciting incident, and rising action. Act 2 has the major turning point, escalating tensions, and the mini climax. The third act involves the major climax, falling action, and resolution. Let's break down Act 1. I'm going to be doing this by going through the plot of one of my favorite films, Titanic. I'm only going to be assessing the part of the story which includes young Rose in 1912. The 3-act structure for this just works a lot better than trying to mix with the present day stuff. It becomes a little tricky then. So let's get into the story of Titanic and how it involves the 3-act structure. Act 1 of Titanic takes place from the beginning of the story where Rose boards the ship up until Jack and Rose attend the 3rd class party. So let's break down the different segments. So the part 1 is exposition. The first part of the story should be establishing what is normal. This will be the settings, characters, motivations, and whatnot. In Titanic, when the story transitions from old Rose to the story, we get establishment in the first few seconds. We see a ship which looks to be from prior to the year 1950. A few seconds later, we see a car being loaded onto the ship, and this car is obviously new or older than like the 1930s. We then start to see people and how they're dressed, and it's clearly then that it's in the 1910s. Now, since Titanic is a true story, most people knew it sank in 1912. They didn't have to do this, but for the few people who didn't know the story from the beginning, this is a good way to zone in on when and where we are in the world. Now that we know the settings, we begin to meet the characters. First, we meet Rose. We can tell by her clothing and the car she arrives in that she is likely very wealthy. We then get her first line. I don't see what all the fuss is about. It doesn't look any bigger than a Mortania. And we start to get the sense that maybe Rose is a little snobby or bratty. We then are introduced to the villain of the story, Cal. They do a good job at introducing him by making him not appear to be a bad man from the beginning. We again know that he's wealthy, but we don't learn much more about him. Then we meet Rose's mom, who gets out of the car, and we get about the same vibes as we've got from Rose. After they board the ship, we are transitioned into a bar where there are 4 people playing cards, and we see 2 tickets for the ship laying on the table with some coins, and we realize that it's likely the pot for the winner of the game. We get the sense that these characters are not very wealthy. We then hear a couple lines of dialogue which helps to further establish this. Fabrizio says, You're betting everything we have, and Jack replies, when you've got nothing to lose. The game is finished and Jack wins, and they run onto the ship. On the ship, we begin to see the class divide. While Jack is standing at the back of the ship waving to the onlookers as it leaves port, Rose is in her cabin looking at the expensive painting she bought. Then we start to get some of the sense that maybe this couple is not as perfect as we think. Cal criticizes the painting and Rose defends them. We have a few more scenes showing this class divide further before the inciting incident. The inciting incident of a story is the major turning point towards the beginning of what gets the novel into play. So for this instance, with the story we're talking about, the movie Titanic, this is when Rose decides that she's going to end her life and jump off the back of the ship. We see her having this meltdown and running to the stern and climbing over the railing. Jack then appears and they have a conversation which ultimately leads to Rose deciding not to end things. She tries to come back over the railing but ends up slipping, and Jack saves her life. Back in her cabin, Rose and Cal have a conversation where you start to realize that she feels trapped in the relationship. The final part of Act 1 is the rising action, and this is when you start to see change happening slowly from that inciting incident. So in the film, this is going to take up the rest of Act 1, and it's from when Jack and Rose are seen walking on the deck talking up until where they go to the third class party. So, we start to really see the classified mixed. We start to hear Rose's backstory and how she came from wealth and privilege, and then we hear Jack's backstory about how he's, as he says, a tumbleweed blowing in the wind. And they're so different, and you start to see that Rose maybe wants to be like Jack, and it's not explicitly put, but maybe Jack is seeing how the rich is, and maybe he's realizing being rich isn't everything as it is. So the writing action continues through the dining room scene where they all eat together, and then finally the Act 1 ends when they're down at that third class party and they're having fun. And up until this point, it's been more of just a friendship. They've been nice to each other. They've been hanging around like you do with a friend. But by the end of that party, you start to notice that it's going to be more romance than anything. I hope you enjoyed the breakdown of the first act of the story using the movie Titanic, and I hope you find it very informative. Make sure to like and subscribe this, it really helps out my channel. Also, check my link tree for the links to my TikTok and Blue Sky, and please leave any comments for any future topics you'd like me to discuss. And as always, keep writing.